We learn about international economic institutions since World War II, and today's course outline it's about knowing how they classify, with example, the main types of international economic organization, identify economic circumstances in which the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization are active. We also look at how to compare the different levels of integration found in regional trade agreement, that is the ROTA, analyze the roles of international economic organization, and finally we also look at the pros and cons of international organizations. International institution has been on since World War II, and these institutions were set up to look into the financial and economic concerns of the different countries in the world. And some of the institutions can be formal or informal. Some are formal and some are informal. When we say formal institutions, they are institutions that are written and they are regulated by rules, laws, codes, and constitution. This is totally different from the informal constitutions that are based on customs or traditions such as manners and ethics, norms of a particular place, country. Okay, like the international institutions, they are formal institutions and they are regulated by laws set up by different countries in the world. Now, examples of the formal institutions of the international institutions, they set up for different reasons. The ones for industries, commodity or industry, and they are also for agencies, commissions, and agencies for managing shared resources. They are also set up for development funds and banks. We also have for trade development and economic stability, and the international trade agreement, which involves nations, that means regional trade alliance or trade blocs such as the European Union. Now we have the OPEC. These ones are under the commodity or industry specific. We have the IMF, World Bank, and the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization. This is for the Global Organization for Trade, Development, and Microeconomics. We have the North America Free Trade Agreement and the European Union. So all these are former institutional categories of international institutions. Now, the most popular among these international organizations are the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. In this class, we're going to talk about them specifically and the roles that we wish they play. And all these institutions were set up in the Bretton Woods Conference held in 1944 at the Bretton Woods New Hemisphere, where all the world leaders gathered from the Allied power. And the goal was to create a more stable and prosperous world economy. And they also wished to avoid problems from the 1930s by creating institutions that will define rules for trade and international payments. So we knew that when these rules are set up, it will regulate international relations in terms of trade and other economic activities better. Now, specifically talking about the IMF was created, like I said, it was created in most like every other in 1944. The IMF, its primary purpose is to assist in the creation of simple, crisis-free system of international payment between countries, and its main activities is to provide technical and financial assistance to countries that have debt problems or unstable currency. This is why you see most of the developing countries in the world they patronize IMF a lot because they are the ones that are usually face this type of problem. They have unstable currency, and sometimes they usually need financial assistance sometimes because they more they produce less and they are very dependent in other countries. Like we've done in our previous classes, we know that the more a country is dependent and exports more of import more of goods, there's the GDP of a country is low, and it means that the country will be definitely at the long term will be needing financial assistance. So when countries need financial assistance like this, they approach the IMF and they are assisted. Now, how is the IMF funded? Where do they get all this fund from? IMF is funded by quota of each member, what they pay. The quota is proportional to the size of the economy and determines how many votes it has. The more they pay and the more votes they have. And this quota is mostly the developed countries are able to pay their quota more, and hence they have a higher votes compared to other countries that will not have the capability to pay their quotas. Also, the IMF, it's also known as the international lender of last resort. Like most countries, they actually need to borrow money. They go meet the lender, which is the IMF, to borrow them. But this is mostly conditions. It's not as if they go there and they just get what they want. Yes, they will get, but these loans are limited in size and come with a set of requirements which the country that is borrowing must meet and be able to to must fulfill. So IMF provides loans to countries that cannot make payments on their debts and that cannot borrow elsewhere. And at the same time, these loans are serviced even though the basic amount that was borrowed has not been paid. These countries that borrow these funds are expected to service these loans over time until they fully paid. The IMF monitors exchange rate and also assists countries when their currencies collapse in value. And it's also over time it has important role is to provide standard and technical assistance for the international reporting of economic and financial data. Now, let's talk about the World Bank. Now we know all about the IMF. Let's talk about the World Bank. The World Bank is different from the IMF. IMF is to help assist countries with technical and financial issues, problem, but the World Bank is focused on uh, economic development. Its main function is to provide capital and technical assistance for economic development. This is where it's different from the IMF. Just like the IMF, the World Bank was set up in Bretton Woods and with a membership and structure similar to the IMF. Countries buy shares and the number of shares determines their voting rights. Okay, you have to buy shares with the World Bank. The World Bank was originally intended as a mechanism to rebuild Europe after World War II because after the World War II, the world, a lot of things were destroyed, and this put an abrupt stop to economic activity. For it to bounce back and quickly, the World Bank was set up to assist countries and help the world come back, achieve its economic development in one aspect. Now, we also have what they call the GATT. The GATT is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. GATT is like a forum. This was also set up in Bretton Woods, but did not start until 1950. GATT itself, forums be organized over time. This is also like a trade round and to improve, to discuss trade rules and the mechanism that will help open markets for more international trade and benefit. And over time, the gap that has been read ahead in different parts of the world. Initially, gas focused on proportional tariff reduction and emission of quotas. It did not promote free trade, it promoted freer trade and proportional tariff reduction, which require each country to reduce tariff by the same percentage, but tariff remain different. But in the 1970s, there were new issues which arose that required discussion and negotiation, such as in subsidy for industry that gave advantages and problems of selling goods at artificially low prices. And also, they also looked at barriers to trade in new areas such as services. Now, the different types of GAL that has held over time, there was the one for Uruguay round, which was in 1995, and the Doha round, this was in 2001. Every round has its own focus, what they do or the objective they intended or they achieved. If you look at this slide, slide 15, you see the different guards rounds that have been held and the number of participants. It has been held in different countries, part of the world. And in 2001, it was last held, I think, Doha. Okay. Now, looking at the guard, it remains in effect and is the primary agreement overseen by the World Trade Organization. GATT is regulated and it's under the World Trade Organization. The two guiding principles of GATT are national treatment and non-discrimination. There should be no discrimination among the participants. National treatment means that foreign goods must be treated the same as national goods, and non-discrimination prohibits different tariffs or rules for different countries. This is the principle of most favored nation status. And it's expected that for all World Trade Organization members must adhere to these rules when trading with the other World Trade Organization members. Now, moving on to slide uh, 16, we're going to look at the regional trade agreements, which can be bilateral, that means between two members. It could also be plurilateral, that means several members, and it could be multilateral. This means it's open to everyone that wants to join. There's no you don't have to be a member or not. It's just that it's open to everyone as far as you have interested. And there are five levels to the ROTA, which is the Regional Trade Agreement. This is the PACHA agreement, which is free trade in one or a few products. There's also the free trade area of all goods and services, that means the output. There's custom union, that means the FTA plus a common external tariff. There's the common market, the custom union plus free movement of labor and capital input. That means this has to do with the input. Then we have the economic union, this common market plus substantial harmonization of economic policies. Now, examples of prominent ROTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. We also have the EU, which is the European Union ROTA. This is for European countries. Any country that is in the Europe continent has the privilege to be part of this EU. It means that it's being a European country is one of the requirements for to be in the EU. We have the Gulf Cooperation Councils, these are for Gulf countries. We have the Economy of West African States. This is for Africa countries that are from West Africa. That's ECOWAS. We have the Asia Free Trade Area, which is the AFTA, and the Common Market of the South, which is the MERCOSUR. Then the NAFTA, which is the North America Free Trade Agreement. I know you might not know all, but the ECOWAS and the EU is very popular among us. It is a very popular ROTAs that every now and then we hear a lot of news about them. And all these ROTAs are under and are overseen by the WTO, World Trade Organization, which is presently headed by in Nigeria. Now we move on to slide 19. We're going to talk about the ROTA over time, how it has been operational. In 2012, there were 338 were active, and most of active members, and most of them were created since 1990. There are exceptions to most of the agreements. Free trade agreement do not usually have 100% free trade. They are when they say free trade doesn't mean it's 100%. It's just some privilege given to members that they can actually make their trading more beneficial. Then RTA violates the non-discrimination rule of the GATT. This is a problem, okay? And WTO countries treat member country better than others. Like for example, like the EU, um, or the ECOWAS, they will definitely give privilege or preferences, or as the case may be, to their member countries or than non-member countries. For example, if you countries that are not from the West African continent of Africa might probably find it very challenging to enjoy the privilege given to ECOWAS member, just like for the EU. Uh, However, the World Trade Organization allows this as long as trade creation is greater than the trade diversion. It's also trade creation is when new trade created by the agreement, and trade diversion is when there is diversion from a non-member to a member. So this is all about the RTA violation in the non-discrimination of the GATT and the WTO. In the violation of the non-discrimination rule of the GATT and the WTO. So moving on to slide 20, we want to look at the proponents of RTA claiming the following. If this that they help world trade by reducing some barriers, so the because even though there is criticism about them, they've actually helped world trade by reducing some barriers. They allow countries to try new agreements that can potentially be used later in the WTO negotiation. They encourage WTO agreement by offering an alternative in case the World Trade Organization is stalled. Okay. Now, but the critics of the RTA, they are of the they are of the opinion that the RTA divert attention from multilateral negotiation and undermine the WTO agreement. They rarely, so not WTO agreements, rather WTO rules, and they rarely, if ever, lead to a WTO agreement. They often discriminate against poorer nations. That means they feel that their their organizations as for the RTAs, they favor richer nations than the poorer nations. Now we're going to look at slide 21. Why do we have international institutions? International institutions provide public goods are non-excludable. Everyone benefits even if they do not pay, they benefit from it. Public goods are not rival, not distinguishable. They are not diminished by consuming them. Public goods are a free rider problem. They have a free rider problem. Now, the two most important characteristics of public goods provided by international institutions are it increased international economic order and increased certainty about the behavior of other nations. We want to look at the four public goods provided by international institutions. One is the open market in recessions, capital flows to less developed countries, international money for paying international debt, and last result lending. Just for example, if there was no IMF, many of these countries will not be able to have be able to sustain themselves sustain themselves or for some period of time where they need the financial aid. But IMF has been able to actually come to rescue of these countries that need this financial assistance by giving them the platform for them to borrow, even though there are some requirement that this country has to meet. But the most important thing is that they were able to have access to funds which they need to sustain their financial problems. Then another thing, the general criticism, the first we looked at the criticism of the RTAs. Okay. Then now we're going to RTLs. We're going to look at the criticism of international institutions, just like the World Bank, the IMF, and the likes. So, there's problem of sovereignty and transparency. Countries feels that uh, these countries that receive assistance, they feel that when they get this financial help from IMF, they give up the ability to set up their own policies. You see, their policies are no longer being managed by them. They feel that the IMF do this because they are the ones that have provided the finance, so they lose total control of their own policies. This is why many countries they don't want to borrow from the IMF, even when they need financial need. They look at other options at which they can borrow money from. There is also they also feel that decision is not transparent. That the countries that with the highest that has the highest votes and quota, that pay the highest quota, they have the biggest say in decision making. By so doing, the poor countries are left out. And most times it's not easy for these poor countries to adjust to the requirements and rules of the IMF or this international organization, because there's high cost to that. Okay. Then the ideology of this of international institution are mostly of the developed countries, the bigger countries, because they have bigger say in it, because of course they have the biggest vote, and also they contribute the most in it. So that is all about for the criticism of international institutions. We'll try to read your slides. It's just 25 slides. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask in the comment section. Thank you.